If you have two different conditions and these conditions have different limits, you may want something to identify for the end user that they're essentially at different alert states. We actually use that term, alert states, to identify these things that you see right here. Let me open this up. As you can see, we have one that has a my high state and one with a my high state. These are two different of what we call alert states. Now they're defined up in here. If you go into Tools, Notification Settings, this is where we actually set up these states. And the order in which we set these is very important. High being the more severe than the high. And we'll talk more about that in the next video. But the idea behind this is we've got two different conditions and two different alert states when these conditions become true. Now, these can be very useful because what we can do is essentially force the system not to send out an email when we transition from, let's say we go from a high state into a high state and then we go back into a high state. Now, there's no need to send another email at that point, and that's exactly what this is designed to do. If you take a look at the illustration in your training materials, you'll see that the idea behind the alert state is as we go from one alert condition to another. So let's mark this, that's the high state. Let's mark this as the high state. Once we go over that high state, that's when we send this high alert. It's only when we go into the high state that we send a high alert, and it's going to have a different alert condition. It's going to have a different alert state, and that alert state shows up in the notification, in the email, etc. So the idea behind this is, what's going to happen when we go back from this alert state down into this state right here? Well, technically, it is a high alert. So not a high, but a high alert, because it is past this. So at this point in time, we have a value right here. Does it trigger another email? Well, no, it doesn't. That will not trigger another email if you've configured the notification properly with these high and high states, with these alert states in the proper order. Eventually, we would like to add the feature that when we return into a high state at that point right there, that we will also suppress the email. In fact, we wrote up the documentation that way, and I'm sorry if this has been misleading, but right now this actually will go ahead and trigger another email notification at this point. Okay? And it will trigger that because, as I said, it's not working the way we would like eventually to make this work. The mistake here is the documentation shows that that's the behavior you'll get, but in fact what you're going to see here at this point in time, you are going to get a high alert. That's going to be sent as an email. Okay, let's take a look at what the configuration looks like and also take a look at some end results. In my sample notification, the My Note 1, I had configured the first condition to take this state called My High. That was the condition greater than 250. Configured the second one to take the state My High. These are both in the state group called My State Group 1. And you configure this under Tools, Notifications, and then go in here to this state group configuration. This is how you would do it. Now, the end result, when I go from, let's say I go from a value of 100 to 275 and then 315, what we should see is that we send email for both of those. When we return back to 275, we should not see an email. And then when we return to, say, 350, we should not see an email, but in fact, currently we do. So let me show you an example of when we did this. Now, here's an example of the notification results we get when I go from, I think the value was from 100 to 275. As you can see, this notification went into a My High state. Okay, that was the status. And as you can see, if you look at this is why we like to see these the document or the logging of these events. Remember, we can either show the contact events or not show the contact events. In this case, we definitely want to show the contact events for this one. So let me show those again. I'll scroll down to what I was just looking at. And when we look at this contact event here, it says that it's been automatically acknowledged and we sent an email, as the notification should. Now, later on, when it went to from 275 to say 315, at that point it went into a high state, and at that point we sent another email. And we acknowledged because this was set for auto acknowledge. Now watch what happens next though. What happened next was we went from a my high state to just the my high state, because this value just a few seconds later went from 315 or so down to somewhere between 250 and 300. So at that point its state changed, and we do document that and we acknowledge, but we don't send the email. As you can see, the suppressing of the email is what we were able to do, because of the activity of these alert states. Now the last part of this is, after we went down to between 250 and 300, I then pushed it up to 315 or so, above 300. It did take the my high state again, and this is where we have a current deficiency in the software. It did send a notification at that point. As you can see by the design, that was not supposed to happen. We are not supposed to send that notification until after we come out of the the high state and down into a high state and then return again. That's something that's going to be fixed in the next release. So in summary, what's working now is we are suppressing this event right here. That when we return back to this period here, we do suppress that as an event. However, we're not correctly suppressing this event.